Now, based on some questions and comments I've gotten from people lately, I thought today would be a good time to go talk about the basics of the Bible. I know we've talked about this before, but I've had some questions and comments from people that have thought that this might be helpful, and I figured since today is sort of a new beginning, that it would be good to just go to the basics today. Now, of course, this is a Bible, and it's divided into two parts, the Old Testament and the New. There is disagreement among a lot of Christians as to what it means, Old Testament and New. You can find a lot of different opinions on that. The one I think is the most accurate is that Old Testament is everything before Jesus, and New Testament is everything concurrent with and after Jesus. So that, I think, is actually what Old and New actually mean. You can find a lot of different people that say different things, but I've never seen any of those explanations I really accepted. So that's Old and New. Now, what's Testament? You'll notice Testament is related to the word testify, and when you testify in court, for example, you give evidence. And you might have evidence like, say, a store is robbed, and you ride by and you see Mary robbing the store. That's evidence that Mary robbed the store. If you're called to testify, you give evidence. You say, she robbed the store. They say, how do you know that? You say, because I saw her do it. In other words, you're giving evidence. And that's what the Bible really is. The Bible is the evidence for what Christians believe. Testament means evidence. And so the Bible is the evidence for what Christians believe. Christians believe certain things, and the Bible tells why they believe that. That's what testament means. Now, how is it, though, that the Bible gives evidence for Christian beliefs? If you read the Bible, you'll notice that it in general is not a list of beliefs. It's not like Christians believe this, that, and the other. That's not what the Bible is. If you go to the Bible, you'll see that it's just a bunch of different kinds of writings. And there's all different kinds of writings in the Bible. There's historical books in the Bible. There's poems in the Bible. There are letters. There are books that give stern warnings. And there are things written in very weird images, like if you read in the Old Testament the book of Daniel, and the New Testament the book of Revelation, you'll see very weird images. And so for the most part, the Bible does not contain a list of beliefs. Christian beliefs are derived from the Bible by a process called interpretation. And interpretation simply means to find the meaning of something. If you interpret something from French into English, you take a bunch of French words that people don't know what they mean, and you put them into English words that they do. You find the meaning behind those words. The same thing is true with the Bible. You read the writings of the Bible, and then you have to interpret or find the meaning of that, and that is where Christian beliefs come from. It is in that way that the Bible constitutes the evidence for Christian beliefs. The idea is that for all these writings in the Bible, there is some deeper meaning behind them. And in order to know Christian beliefs, you have to figure out that meaning. That's what it means to interpret the Bible. You figure out a deeper meaning to the writings of the Bible. Now, of course, the Bible is a book, but we also refer to the different parts of the Bible as books. You know, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, those are all called books of the Bible. And in this case, a book means a subdivision of a larger book. So if we say we had a reading from the book of Titus, obviously the book of Titus doesn't look like this, it's in here. The Bible is the larger book, and the books of the Bible that we talk about are subdivisions of the Bible. The books of the Bible are the individual writings that compose the one book of the Bible. Now I want to stop here for a minute and just say that we need to be clear that Christian beliefs do not ultimately come from the Bible. Christian beliefs come from Jesus. Christian beliefs are based on what happened in Jesus. Jesus' birth, his life, the things he did, the things he taught, his crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension, and eventual second coming. That is the foundation or bedrock of Christian beliefs. We find that in Jesus. So Christian beliefs, first of all, before anything else, are based on Jesus. But of course, Jesus was on earth 2,000 years ago, and there were no historical accounts of Jesus that survived. All that has been lost to history as far as actual historians are concerned. But there are writings that come from ancient Christians that tell us about Jesus, and some of these writings have survived through the years. Christian historians estimate that there were somewhere between, I've seen anywhere from 200 to 400 ancient Christian writings in the earliest days. Most of those did not survive. We know they existed because some of them are referenced in other things that did survive, and then historians have various reasons for believing that others of them existed. Now, of all those 200 to 400 writings that had existed back then, 27 were chosen to go in what is called our New Testament. And we do not know exactly how those 27 writings were chosen to be in the New Testament. The process by which they chose those has been lost to history, and we simply do not know. We do know, though, that there was a lot of disagreement during the process of choosing what to include. But however they were chosen, by the late 300s AD, official Christianity had chosen 27 books for the New Testament, and that's what we have today. The books of the New Testament are classified into 4 groups: Gospels, historical, letters, and apocalyptic. The Gospels are the first 4 books of the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They record for us some of the events of the life of Jesus. They tell us about Jesus' birth. They give us a glimpse of what Jesus did when he was about 30 years old. They give us some of Jesus' teachings and some of the things he did. They tell us about his death, resurrection, and ascension. Now, the word gospel means good news. And the fact that these books are called gospels tells us that what Jesus did is good news, that it's good news for us. The reason they are called gospels comes from the Gospel of Mark. And if you look at the Gospel of Mark, it opens the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ. So that's why they're called gospels. It comes from the Gospel of Mark. There is only one historical book in the New Testament. It is the book of Acts. It comes right after the Gospels. The book of Acts tells us some of the things that ancient Christians did and some of the things that happened right after Jesus ascended into heaven. The book of Acts, though, does not tell us about all of the first Christians, only some of them. There were many, many more Christians around back then than the book of Acts tells us about. And so the book of Acts is not complete in the sense it doesn't tell us about all the Christians back then. It just tells us about certain ones. Now, the next section of the New Testament begins with the book of Romans, and this is the section that is called the letters section. And it consists of 21 books, and these books are all believed to have been letters written by either individual Christians to one person or to a group of people. You'll sometimes hear these referred to as epistles. Epistle is just a fancy word for a letter. And so the letters are written to different people. The book of Romans was written to Christians in Rome. Then we've got 1st and 2nd Corinthians written to people in the town of Corinth. Galatians written to the people of Galatia. Ephesians written to the people of Ephesus. Philippians written to the people of Philippi. Colossians written to the people of Colossae. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians written to the people of Thessalonica. 1st and 2nd Timothy are written to a man named Timothy. Titus, what we heard from this morning, was written to a group of Christians in the town of Crete, or in the island of Crete, headed by a man named Titus. Philemon is written to a man named Philemon. Hebrews was a letter written to an unspecified group. James was written to an unspecified group. 1st and 2nd Peter are two separate letters written by a man named Peter. 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John were written to different people, and Jude was written by a man named Jude. Now there is one final book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. It is called an apocalyptic book. An apocalypse is a great disaster and great destruction, and in a biblical sense, apocalyptic means that the world will end in final devastation. And the book of Revelation is a prophecy of that. It foretells the end of the world as a great final devastation. And so that's the way the New Testament, that's the way the Bible ends, with the book of Revelation. And so that tells you right there that one of the most basic Christian beliefs is that the way the world is going to end is at a great final devastation. That's the way it all ends. And that's what Revelation tells us. So who wrote the books of the New Testament? No one knows. You know, the Gospels are called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and it's generally assumed that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote them, but nobody knows who Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were. A lot of people say they were disciples, but remember, Jesus did not have a disciple called Luke. So we really don't know who these people are. It is generally assumed that the same person who wrote Luke wrote the book of Acts, because the book of Acts opens and addresses to a certain person, Theophilus, which is the same person the Gospel of Luke is addressed to. And the book of Acts opens and says, in my earlier work I told you, so people would say that in Acts, my earlier work, refers back to the Gospel of Luke. And that is, you know, is what people think. And as far as the letters are concerned, there are a number of the letters of the Old Testament, of the New Testament. If you look at them, the first word in all of them is Paul. And a lot of them claim to have been written by Paul. And some biblical scholars believe that Paul wrote all of those that claim to be written by him, and some believe that he did not write all of them, that some people just wrote under his name. The books of 1st and 2nd Peter claim to be written by a man named Peter, and a lot of people think that Peter was the same as the disciple Peter. Some people believe it wasn't, that was just somebody writing under Peter's name. Now, the books of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, nobody knows who wrote them. There's no clue in them who wrote them. They are called 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John because the themes in those are very similar to the Gospel of John. And if you look at if you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and you'll get an idea of how those Gospels flow, and they're pretty similar to each other. And then you go read John, you'll notice it's completely different. And so the letters of 1st, 2nd, 3rd John contain the same themes as the Gospel of John. Now the book of Revelation claims to have been written by a man named John. Some people think that was John, the disciple of Jesus, and some people think it's somebody else. In the end, there's no way to know who wrote these books. And that's the same way there's no way to know when they were written. Some people believe the Gospels were the first ones written. Some people believe the Gospel of Mark actually was the first book of the New Testament to be written. Other people disagree. And some people think the letters of Paul constitute some of the earliest ones that were written. No way to know that. The only thing we know is what has survived. And the earliest piece of any of the New Testament that we have is a fragment from the Gospel of John, and it dates from about 90 years after the time of Jesus. So that's the earliest that we have. So that's the New Testament. Now, in the late 300s, when official Christianity decided to compile a group of Christian scriptures, they decided at that time to include the Jewish scriptures as a part of Christian scriptures, and that would be our Old Testament. And just like we don't know exactly why they chose the 27 books they chose to go in the New Testament, we do not know the exact reason they had for choosing to put the Jewish scriptures in as our Old Testament. Their reasoning on that has been lost to history, and no one knows. Of course, that doesn't stop people from telling you why they did it. These people have opinions that sometimes they present as fact, but the fact is that no one knows. So for whatever reason, when they decided to compile Christian scriptures back in the late 300s, they decided to incorporate the Jewish scriptures into that. And that's our Old Testament. The Old Testament contains 39 books. The first books of the Bible are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those are the main Jewish scriptures. Those 5 books are what Jews refer to as the Torah. And the Torah means the law. And it's the laws that God has laid down that Jews feel they have to follow. Sometimes you will hear these first 5 books called the Pentateuch, and that's just a Greek word that means 5 books. So the first book, Genesis, is concerned with the creation of the world and things from very ancient times, things like Noah's Ark and the Tower of Babel. But then very soon, Genesis narrows down. And it narrows down to concentrate on one man, Abraham and his descendants. And from then on, except for one book in the Bible, the book of Job, the Old Testament concentrates on Abraham and his descendants. Now, as we get over into the book of Exodus, we see that focus on Abraham and his descendants narrow greatly, because Abraham had a number of children during his life, and so Abraham had a great number of descendants. But when we get to the book of Exodus, we see the focus only on one tiny segment of Abraham's descendants, and that is people known as the Hebrews. And we first see the Hebrews when they are slaves in Egypt. They leave Egypt under Moses. They wander in the desert for 40 years. And that's what the first 5 books of the Bible largely are about. Abraham's descendants, then narrowed down in Exodus to a tiny fraction of Abraham's descendants, and then we see the Hebrews in the wilderness for 40 years. Then the next section of the Old Testament picks up after the Torah or the Pentateuch, and this is known as the historical book. And it starts with the book of Joshua. And in the book of Joshua, you'll remember the Hebrews enter the promised land. And then they develop a kingdom. Their kingdom weakens, it splits, they get taken over by other people, and they never have their nation again. But at the end of the section of historical books in the Bible, they come back from exile in Babylon and rebuild the temple. The historical books include Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. And this recounts the history of the Hebrew people and then the Jewish people up until about the year 539 BC. We can tell about what year that was because in the books of Nehemiah and Ezra, when it talks about the people returning from Babylonian captivity, it lists the Persian leaders at that time, and you can look back into history and see who was the leader at such and such a time. So it's about the Old Testament as we know it ends at about the year 539 BC. Now I want to stop here for a minute and think about the difference between Hebrew and Jew. Okay, Hebrews are the ones who were descendants of Abraham and through the line of Isaac, and then Jacob. And remember in the Old Testament, Jacob had 12 sons, and there was a famine in the land, and they all ended up in Egypt after Joseph was there. And they stayed there for hundreds of years, and eventually they all became slaves. And they're the ones who left Egypt under Moses. These are the Hebrews. Their descendants entered the promised land under Joshua, and then they developed a kingdom there. Their kingdom lasted until the death of Solomon, their last king, at which time it split apart. Israel was the kingdom in the north. Judah was the kingdom in the south. And there is a point in the Old Testament, after that happened, that the people of Israel are basically written off and written out of the picture. They are not in the picture anymore. They don't surface again until the New Testament, when they surface again as Samaritans. And so the people of Judah become known as Jews. And you can see the similarity to that. Judah, Jews. That's where the word Jews come from. The people of Judah, not the people of Israel. The people of Judah, they become known as Jews. And so you see in the Old Testament a great funneling happening. You see God making a promise to Abraham and his descendants. And then you see the people themselves gradually narrowing that as we go along, narrowing, until when you get to the latter part of the Old Testament, it is only to a very tiny fraction of Abraham's descendants. Now, the section of the Old Testament after the historical books is called the prophets. And a lot of times we think of a prophet as being someone who foretells the future, but technically, in the biblical sense, a prophet is someone who brings a message from God. In other words, God has a message to give to people, and he gives it through a prophet. He tells the prophet what to say. There are 17 prophetic books in the Old Testament, and they are classified as either minor prophets or major prophets. And that does not refer to their relative importance. It only refers to the size of the book. Books like Isaiah and Ezekiel and Daniel are major prophets because their books are long, and some like Nahum or Obadiah or Jonah are minor prophets because their books are short. In general, in the Old Testament, prophets tell people either one of two things. They warn people that they're evil, they're sinning, and God's mad at them and going to get back at them. Or they tell people that God has punished them enough and God's going to feel sorry for them and restore them. The final section of the Old Testament is called the Writings. It includes Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, and Lamentations. And sometimes these books are called wisdom books because some of them are largely concerned with imparting advice for daily life. That is, the wisdom literature in the Old Testament is concerned with telling you how to live your daily life. And oddly enough, we see the book of Job in here that I said earlier has no connection to any of the other themes in the Old Testament. It has no connection to the Hebrew people, no connection to the Jewish people, no connection to Abraham or Moses. It is a standalone book, the only book in the Old Testament that does not in some way trace back to the larger narrative of the Old Testament. Now, there are 15 books that were originally included in the Bible, in the Jewish scriptures, that are not in the Old Testaments that most Protestants use. These are books of Jewish scripture that had been in there since the beginning and were taken out at some point. If you have, you sometimes see these, the King James Bible came out in 1611. The King James Bible had these extra 15 books in them. They're not really extra, they were in there from the beginning. And in general, these books concern the time between the end of our Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament. In biblical scholarship, these are called intertestamental books. The intertestamental period is that period between the Old and the New Testament, and these intertestamental books concern that period. Now, during the Protestant Reformation, some Protestants thought these books should not be included in the Bible, and after a lot of discussion and disagreement, some Protestants took them out. They just didn't like them in there, so they took them out, and they referred to them as apocryphal books. Now, apocryphal books literally means hidden away. In other words, we don't like these books of the Bible, so we're going to take them out and we're going to hide them away. That's the Apocryphas, 15 books of the Bible. These books were taken out by some Protestant, but Roman Catholics left them in, Orthodox Christians left them in, and Anglicans also left them in. It's important to realize that only some Protestants took these books out. And so that's a general overview of the Bible. And I think the Bible is a fascinating book to read. And one thing I always like to tell people when they read the Bible is remember, I like to think of it as the founding of the United States of America. And you know, the United States of America is not even 300 years old yet. But you just think about how long it's been since the time of like George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and all that. Just think about how long it's been since those times. And you think about how everything has changed since the time of George Washington. Just think about how different this country is today since the time of George Washington. You think about how different life is today than from the time of George Washington. Just think about how different everything is, how different people think and all. Okay, the Bible is over 7 times farther back in history than that. So you just imagine if things were so different in George Washington's day than they are today, you multiply that by 7 times back and you think, okay, how different, so very different things were when the Bible was written. That, you know, people thought about everything different. Everything was different. And so, you know, we are getting a glimpse, and this is one of the best ancient texts in the world to get a glimpse of how people thought about things and how people's lives were then. So when you're reading the Bible, you've got to keep in mind that these people lived literally in a different world than we do. Just think if you had lived in the year 1775 or 1776, what a different world it would have been. And now go to the year 20, or go back to the year 1000 BC, and imagine how different it would be. So these people are speaking to us from the ancient past. Their words have lasted this long. And I think we should heed those words and avail ourselves of their wisdom.